Join me, Mark Windows, for Windows on the World live every Sunday 9 to 11 PM GMT. Check out our archive and programme stream at windowsontheworld.net. Welcome to Windows on the World, everybody. Tonight we're going to actually look into the devolution of the human race. Yes, they're devolving nicely, and we're going to talk all about that. A little bit of a follow-up to all this stuff we've been doing about citizens' assemblies. Yes, we now have the results, the report from the first city to have a citizens' assembly on climate change, Oxford City Council. And it makes banal and terrifying reading. But first of all, a little word about what we're going to be doing over the next couple of weeks. We've got some talks coming up, and it would be great if people go to windowsontheworld.net and check them out. Next week we're in Colchester all day, 1:30 till 7 PM, and all the details are on the website, windowsontheworld.net. In fact, I will be making an announcement about the times and dates at the end of the show. So let's get straight in it. Now, does anybody know this? They probably do. Listeners to the show probably will. That the original title for The Origin of Species by Charles Darwin was On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection or the Preservation of Favoured Races in the Struggle for Life. Now, social Darwinism is still a strong driver of social engineering. Now, a look into that tonight, along with the latest in the control and management of population. Yes, we are going to be talking about that. So, talking about enslavement of the human mind on the farm called Planet Earth. Yes, the first Citizens' Assembly has steered the city of Oxford into voluntary servitude, all for the common good. Don't be selfish. It's not all about you, you know. It's about everybody else. That's what they tell you. Humans are happy to make themselves extinct, or so they say. That's what they're saying, isn't it? It's repeated by all those who've been indoctrinated into the apocalyptic cult that's now called the climate emergency. Now, this, in reality, is the result of a lack of a real threat, right? There's no real threat anymore, so it has to be the weather. It's as simple as that. Came out of the Club of Rome. Late 60s onwards, we put it in our talks, the real Citizens' Assembly. So if you want to book the real Citizens' Assembly and find out where all this stuff really came from and how you're being hoodwinked, well, book the talks through the website. Let's carry on with this. In reality, it's the result of a lack of a real threat. That's where this climate emergency came from. In the absence of wars, famine and the like, climate change would fit the bill, said in the Club of Rome document, The First Global Revolution. And that was a long time ago. They're pretty advanced on this stuff now. So this, in reality, is the result of the lack of a real threat. That's all this is. So the sixth mass extinction is the one of the mind. The vacation of critical thinking has been extended indefinitely. The time for thinking is over. It was over quite a long time ago. The system of indoctrination has worked, though. Nothing like a long-term plan unfolded through a series of inciting incidents to take its natural conclusion. Now, that's very important because there has to be an end goal in sight. And the end goal of all of this idea of Citizens' Assembly is to go above government. We thought we had government. Well, we used to have an idea that there was this thing called democracy. Now, that disappeared out the window about 15 years ago. And now what we have is this enforced consensus. So in the present time, a large number of humans are devolving by consent. Look at The Guardian any day of the week. Read the New York Times. That's a prime example. The theory of man-made climate change will be proven to have been a successful control and management system when those who imposed it are gone. and the higher intelligence that runs the planet have had their way. Now we're going to get into something interesting. Yes, the bigger picture. Now, this has to be an upper management decision, all of this control and management that's been enforced on people, the stuff we talk about, the Agenda 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. You can't tell me that those useful idiots in your local council and the useful idiot who's imposing livability, the new form of benefice in Oxford, have actually got their own minds. No, they haven't. They've been mentored into a program. Who mentored them into the program? The people who are working for the globalists who put it into practice in the first place. They came out of the Rio conference. People like Edmund de Rothschild, Maurice Strong, Gro Harlem Brundtland. Just look up these people and find out how influential they've been on your life. But let's go above that. The higher intelligences, maybe, just maybe, the planet is actually being terraformed over billions of years, and the intelligences that put us here have had enough and think maybe there are too many of them, let's get it back under control. That would make sense, wouldn't it? It's not just the World Bank. It can't be. It can't be, can it? But yes, it has to be an upper management decision as it's been executed globally with precision, and there is nothing left to chance in this global action plan. Propaganda and absolute control of the narrative at every level. Every organisation pushing it has been successfully mentored into poisoning the well with sound bites and untrue propaganda at every level. Now, the real intelligence which runs the show must be aware that the farm called Earth needs a more strict kind of management, and the current system of making the population enslave themselves for the common good is the current management model. Well, it worked in the Middle Ages, it worked with the Catholic Church, it works as a new form of benefice. Relieve your sins by giving the state everything, not just your time, your money and your property, but your whole psyche, your whole belief system will be turned back into thinking that you're worshipping the earth when in fact you're being looted. Good plan though. What we've talked about and proved with facts for years is coming to fruition for the global management system, and the fear of an apocalypse is how this is being imposed. The need for benefits to relieve the sins of one having a carbon footprint. That's what it's all about. The language of the cult is simple and it's dumbed down to perfection. Have you noticed this? Have you noticed this restriction of terms and language? Well, you've got to be vibrant and diverse and inclusive, haven't you? What's wrong with that? There is no need for intelligent language, as intelligent debate is not allowed or tolerated anymore. Have you noticed this? Have you noticed when you say something intelligent that people roll their eyes or they call you a conspiracy theorist because they've been told to? Who implanted that in their rather inactive brains? Well, actually, it was the state. And now the state are getting hold of them at a younger and younger age. They're mentoring children into this and they're disturbing their minds. We talked about that last week. That's what the whole trans agenda is about. That's what having sort of drag queen storytelling in nurseries is all about, to destabilise the mind. Then you can implant what you want. This is classic social engineering. It's nothing personal though, is it? But basically, control of the past, present and future has been taken care of. Repetition and the more grand term social engineering are how dogma is implanted. So the past, let's look at the past. Every historical event deemed to be important did not happen the way storytellers presented it. A simple reviewing of historical narratives will prove this. The present is a continuous and relentless stream of scaremongering over something which, if looked at over the long term, is actually not happening, like the threat of the climate catastrophe, The future is manufactured on a daily basis, and it is all distraction. None of the scare stories and media hysteria are of any importance in your life. Most people don't get this. They will go round and round and round discussing events which have no impact on your life whatsoever. This is called the distraction principle, and it's very, very powerful. That's what the media is actually there for. If you read the book Propaganda by Jacques Ellul, you'll find out how propaganda works on different levels. For instance, academics are the most easily propagandized of all people because they have access to a lot of information, they have an opinion on everything, and they believe the state narrative. Perfect, absolutely perfect. So that's why when people talk about scientists, they mean lobbyists. And when people talk about lobbyists, they are talking about change agents and people who have been put there to do the job. So the future is manufactured on a daily basis. I think that's really important. I thought of that today. It's all distraction. I just look at everything that happens in the present now, and it is all a distraction. It's either intense propaganda of a very simple nature or stuff that's not really of any importance when you realise that we're talking about a much bigger global action plan than Boris Johnson or Jeremy Corbyn. Neither of those have anything to do with what's going on. So the not-so-hidden agenda will happen whatever comes to pass with the left and right political pantomime. The present is the place for outright lies to be projected into the future, and they are every day. I mean, look at it. From Jeffrey Epstein to Greta Thunberg, Trump to Corbyn, the daily distraction has always and will always continue. So why? This is the question. Why are humans devolving? It does appear that it is because they like and need to be told what to do and what to think. They like to be distracted. When I mean they, I'm talking about people generally. People generally like to be distracted with things outside their experience and in actuality of no real importance to their lives. I keep reiterating that because it's been a bit of a theme in our shows. I think this is a massive part of social engineering. There seems to be a need to involve themselves in events which in reality have no effect on the lives of the individual. Now, this is the need for distraction and avoidance. The theory of evolution, this is another interesting thing, is still taught and believed by those indoctrinated into the management system. Now, this is fantastic, isn't it? Because when you look at things like the theory, Darwin's theory of evolution, it's never been proved and it has been disproven. It's a bit like the Lucy skeleton in the Natural History Museum when that's meant to be the missing link, when there isn't a missing link. Once you start looking into this, it's absolutely fascinating. I was talking to someone last night about it, actually. And I think this is a key point because when we're talking about social engineering, we have to talk and look into what is really going on within the psyche of people, and how they've been programmed and conditioned, and more importantly, why. But yeah, the false argument of creation versus evolution with intelligent design thrown into the mix is a perfect example of two issues which do not deal with the subject they address. This is classic. It's really interesting stuff, this, because it goes into the two lies. There's two lies that the state or the state apparatus or the global management system impose on the public, and they fight over the two lies, whereas the agenda goes down the middle. It doesn't matter about the two lies. They don't have no importance. Left or right, creation versus evolution, not important. Not to higher intelligence. These things are not important. The system of having two lies or two distractions or lies pitted against each other is the basis of distraction to keep the argument away from the real questions. And this is where we get the climate emergency, because there isn't one and people believe there is. And if you go against the climate emergency, then you're a conspiracy theorist or a right-wing supremacist. That makes sense, doesn't it? Right-wing supremacists hate the weather, don't they? Well, just think about it. The system, of having two lies or two distractions, or lies pitted against each other, it's a great technique, and it's one that the Soviet Union used quite a lot, and the KGB instructors, or FSB as they call themselves now. You find these talks on YouTube, and they talk about this stuff in the respect of what it really is, which is just a management system. But let's have a quick look at this. Quite interesting. The theory of evolution as a management system. This is actually very important when we're talking about what we're talking about with social engineering, with this climate emergency, with citizens' assemblies. It all comes back to a kind of social Darwinism, because the people who are imposing it believe they're right, and they're not. So, interesting stuff. Let's have a look at how theories with no or very little foundation of evidence take hold. So firstly, why do people still believe in Darwinian evolution when even he didn't? It's true, yeah, that actually, because in his letters, he clearly stated that he could not find one example of evolution. He was absolutely frustrated with it, because obviously he'd been sold a pup. Now, the fused chromosome in Homo sapiens sapiens is also really interesting to me. And this lack of adaptability of the human race. We're not adapted to our environment, our joints wear out, we can't see in the dark, whereas primates are 5 to 10 times stronger, can see in the dark, and when they're born, they're ready to go. We've done quite a few shows on this, and it's something that I think is very key to where we are in the struggle for existence, as Darwin would put it. Now, this is the need for humans to believe in the system that they've been programmed into. Darwinian theory is a cover story for the gullible and an enabling philosophy for those who have controlled the narrative. This is where this imposition started to come from, with people who assume authority. Yeah, it's the need for humans to believe in the system. The real knowledge is not for the hive-minded workers. This is the thinking of the elite and also the education system. The education system is to direct and prevent change in the individual. Now, there was a mixed response to some of the potential solutions in this Oxford Climate Assembly, which we're going to get onto. But basically, let's have a look at the way people are really thinking. It's very childlike, this idea that people have of believing things like Darwinian evolution. So those that terraformed the planet and created the universe must be on a more intelligent level. And this debate, again, is absolutely fascinating. So in the 1800s, this is what I was going to get onto. There was a movement which debated that if the Bible told the truth, then there was no way of peaceably challenging the monarch in Britain, as sovereignty was assumed to descend from the king. Now, isn't that fascinating? Because it's a false premise to start with. So why not come in from a big false premise to disprove a point, you know? The fact that it was even taken seriously, that the God to king bloodline existed, shows that gullibility is not a recent phenomenon. This idea of this Davidic bloodline and this belief that there is a divine right to rule. Now, this all ties into this idea of social Darwinism, which was imposed upon the masses through people who'd been into a so-called higher education system, and the assumed priest class stroke aristocracy who are nothing of the sort. Now, this idea of this God to king bloodline was the reasoning of a group of Whig lawyers and MPs, one of whom was called Charles Lyell, who was very influential on Charles Darwin, and he published this book called The Principles of Geology in 1830. Darwin acknowledged Lyell for supplying a timeline for natural selection. Now, if the Bible was shown to be inaccurate, particularly in respect of the deluge, then the philosophical foundation of the monarch would be shattered. This was their thinking. This was the reasoning which actually kept the important questions out of the picture. Same as now, and the same as in every irrelevant debate which never addresses the really important issues. So before we get into our latest report on social engineering, let's have a quick look at Darwin and his theory. Now, Darwinism is a theory of biological evolution developed by the English naturalist Charles Darwin and others, because he wasn't alone in this. This came out of eugenics, really, and the idea of a superior race and all the rest of it. They thought that because they'd survived, they were somehow superior. Well, look around you. What survives everywhere? Ignorance and stupidity survive everywhere, don't they? Yeah, they stated that all species of organisms arise and develop through the natural selection of small inherited variations that increase the individual's ability to compete, survive and reproduce. Now, this is the mantra that's fed to the Earth's population. Darwin's friend Alfred Russel Wallace stated, "We have defined natural selection." Well, that was very clever of him, wasn't it? Nature never endows a species beyond the demands of everyday existence. Right, okay. Well, with present Homo sapiens sapiens, maybe they've got a point. But previous to that, I think people did actually have a lot more advanced thinking and ability than that. It's clear looking around, though, that evolution isn't happening. So that's another point. Well, I don't know about you, but everyday existence is not that mentally challenging when you get used to it. In fact, it's quite boring, isn't it, if you happen to dwell on it? The limited outlook of these so-called elite thinkers is glaringly obvious when some thought is applied. So the brain had advanced far in advance of our needs. Until recently, that is. Yeah, this was before Extinction Rebellion, obviously, and the climatization of the population took hold. You see, I'm tying it in here because I was going to do a show all about intervention theory and evolution and creationism versus Darwinism and all that sort of stuff. But when I saw this report from the Oxford Citizens Assembly, I thought it was absolutely essential. And in a way, it kind of works really well alongside it because the public must be devolving for this to happen. For this to even have been allowed to happen, the public must be devolving. But basically, we've got a thing here called the Oxford Citizens Assembly, which I've been looking at today. And yeah, it does prove that humans are devolving by consent. It's absolutely incredible. Let's have a look at the outcomes of the first Citizens Assembly. The first Citizens Assembly of Fake Reality and Enforced Outcomes has just released its findings, and they are in line with the global objectives of governance through the new system of one choice, no choice. This is what we've been talking about. You get one choice and it is actually no choice. The public have voted in line with the intended outcome. They've voted really as predicted. And they've actually voted in this Citizens' Assembly for the most draconian measures to be imposed upon them with no real evidence of why this should be the case. The management system of the planet and the law system needs consent. This is another thing I wanted to get into. So we've got the social Darwinism thing is how people buy into this. And then you've got this system of planetary management and law, which needs your consent. And basically, consent is gained in any way it can be gained, by hook or by crook, mainly by coercion and threats. But you did consent in the end, and that's the point. Now, see our other shows on this, on the Citizens' Assemblies, and the ludicrous excuse for public participation in our two shows on the matter. Now, the first one in Oxford, this first public assembly on climate change, Citizens' Assembly on climate change, were told it was good for the planet and necessary. They were told what to think and what to say. They didn't go in there with their own minds. They had their minds changed. So let's look at what this really means. So the consensus was to retrofit homes for their impact on the planet. Now, do you remember the EPN certificates? People might have heard of these things. When you sell your house, you have to have this energy performance certificate, which actually meant nothing for years on end. But nothing is for nothing. And this was thought of well in advance. And they've been talking about retrofitting homes in California for years. It tells you how much your house is emitting. Most people thought this was a pointless exercise, but nothing happens by chance. It's all about energy efficiency and how much carbon your house is emitting. But there is always a predicted outcome. And yes, now it's time for that to be imposed. The socially engineered pawns of Oxford voted on retrofitting their houses, which will cost, get this, approximately £25,000. But don't worry, the local council and the banks will lend you the money. And don't worry if you default on the loan, because you can't afford to eat. And remember, the energy prices are going up by 45% according to the World Bank. Can you see a little pattern here of what's going on? It couldn't be a global property grab on suburban homes, could it? Because remember that suburban housing is unsustainable in this new global action plan. Well, my opinion is if you fall for this, you will fall for anything. This is the property grab coming with other financial pressures, and this will mean you will be made homeless and pushed into shared occupation, which they're already talking about in this Citizens' Assembly on Climate Change report. So, you'll be pushed into shared occupation in one of the new surveilled smart city gulags being built all over the country. You know, those tower blocks that are being built in every city, and you know those housing places which are being built even in villages, which are going to be part shared ownership. That's what we're talking about here. So there cannot be any dissent in this. There cannot be a peasants' revolt. Well, let's look at the last one. That was easy enough to deal with. They just killed the ringleader in front of his followers. And they say he lunged at the Lord Mayor. So basically, what could this be interpreted as now? Let's have a look. Yeah, well, if you threaten someone on Twitter, maybe, the historical narrative always reveals the true picture to those who look into it. The problem is, most would rather talk about issues which do not directly affect them. And this is a key point I want to hammer home in tonight's show, because this seems to be the key to all of it. That people don't think this stuff is going to affect them until it really does. And now it really has. They're imposing it. In this system, one cannot own anything. That's the main important thing. So we can't own property in this system. So it's not really out of the bounds of reality for the system to take the property off us, really, is it? Now that the system is taking full advantage of this golden rule, that's all it's doing. House owners will be indebted to their local council, and the banks, who now want to control all infrastructure on the planet, will help them. The World Bank have been talking about this for the last 30 years. It's what we talk about in the bigger picture. The real Citizens' Assembly. That's the stuff we talk about, where it all came from. Now, let's look at the findings of those engineering and those enforcing this new era of human gullibility. Oxford City Council declared a climate emergency at the start of 2019 as part of its attempt to tackle this. The council decided to act quickly and become the first city council in the country to hold a citizens' assembly on this issue. Now, this is incredible, isn't it? Because they're all rushing, one after the other, to declare a climate emergency so that they can virtue signal the most. Now, Ipsos and Mori were, these are people who put the polls out to commission this. They were commissioned by the government to conduct this work along with their Social Research Institute. Look that one up. So local councils all over the country are so eager to virtue signal and run with the pack. They're falling over each other to make fools of themselves. Well, there's nothing new there, is there? It was rolled out by Involve.org, an open society George Soros funded organisation. Now, they didn't mention that in this report. Now, Involve were given £62,000 by George Soros. They're also funded by the Esme Fairbairn Foundation. And take a look at Involve and what they're about. They're linked into Sortition and My Society. What we have here is the consensus reality that's being rolled out. See our last two shows on the Citizens' Assemblies. They're in the archive. They're in depth and they prove that you're being hoodwinked and treated like idiots. They are the absolute proof of what this is about. But the majority of Assembly members in Oxford, which was 37 out of 41, there's 50 altogether, felt that Oxford should aim to achieve net zero sooner than 2050. Who put that into their highly inactive and minuscule brains, I wonder? Well, they were trained on what to say and think before they went into the Assembly. However, even among those who agreed, it says here, there was little consensus on when Oxford should aim to reach net zero. OK, so they couldn't make their minds up on that. Instead, Assembly members felt that rapid action was required, that the speed of action depended on the specific area under consideration and that interim targets would help measure progress. So they're asking the council to impose draconian measures on them so that they will get down to net zero. This is a kind of public flagellation, isn't it? Assembly members were very aware of the scale of the problem and the need for change. Well, that's the C word. We're not being told what the change was, but they're aware of the scale of the problem because they were told what the scale of the problem was, not because they'd researched it themselves. Important kind of delineation there. So yes, the need for change, both the scale and the need for change, were greater than they had anticipated. Yes, yet what they heard from experts and from fellow assembly members encouraged them that change was possible. Well, there you go. That's called consensus. When imagining a net zero Oxford, assembly members envisioned Oxford having become a leader in tackling the climate crisis. Let's all virtue signal together. I wonder how many Guardian readers were on that Citizens' Assembly. I wonder if that was one of the questions that was asked: which newspapers do you read? In achieving this, Oxford would become a more livable city. A livable city, it's called livability, folks. Look it up. That video that we did a report on, which people thumbed down, which has been shadow banned. Everyone on it now has been shadow banned, so there's no comments. This is creepy. This is coming from Google. This is not coming from Oxford City Council. So yeah, Oxford would become a more livable city with better communities, happier, healthier people, and a cleaner and more pleasant environment to live in, all without sacrificing residents' standard of living. Well, there's a whopping great lie for a start. Energy prices are going up 45%, and you're going to have to retrofit your house, which is going to cost you 25 grand. There is an opportunity here for the council to harness this strong civic pride. I'll bet there is. Assembly members felt that as an affluent city with access to the expertise of the university, Oxford should be leading the way. Well, of course, the useful idiots of Oxford and Cambridge have always been used to subvert and enforce public opinion. Willful stupidity. Yeah, go to the website, windowsontheworld.net, and check out the useful idiot Clyde Lokes, who was in Waltham Forest and implemented the mini Holland smart city gulag there, who's now doing the same in Oxford. Wonder why he was chosen to go there just ahead of the Oxford Citizens' Assembly on climate change. I wonder. It couldn't be because he's a trained change agent, a common purpose trained change agent, actually. Also, Google is shadow banning all comments, as we've said. All comments on that video about Oxford livable streets. Have a look on windowsontheworld.net and see if you can put a comment on it. You'll see your comment, but it's not there. So this is coming from high up. What a surprise. So basically, people have been convinced into this, like they're convinced into timeshare or any other high-pressure scam. Well, there is an emergency, you know. Let's have a look at the report into the Oxford Citizens' Assembly now on climate change. Let's go a bit more in depth. It's basically a test of public gullibility in the biggest asset grab and control system ever introduced since the Poor Laws. I'm not joking here. We've been looking at this quite a long time. It says there was a mixed response to some of the potential solutions discussed, including reducing bin size, charging people for their waste collection. Wait a minute. You already get charged for your waste collection through the teeth by the local council. Share and repair schemes and free cycling. Yes, all worthy virtue signalling good stuff. So, paying fortunes in council tax is not enough. You will pay more for having your rubbish taken away and get a smaller bin, and you voted for it. Can you see my point about devolution over the evolution theory now? That's why I threw that in at the beginning of the show. It probably sounded a bit obtuse to some people, but it's extremely important when you look at what's going on here. So, if this was really agreed to, we are in a mass extinction, but those who should go extinct will not do it, and they continue to virtue signal to each other. Let's have a look now at the additional suggestions in this report, the Oxford Citizens' Assembly on climate change. Some additional comments and questions under the housing and buildings theme included: introduce more co-housing and house sharing. Yes, no ownership of property except by the state and its corporate partners. That's why we have Bechtel and Lend-Lease owning the infrastructure of your local town, city or even village. Mainly the cities at the moment, but look at the groups of developers who own the infrastructure, who the council have sold the infrastructure off to. This all came through devolution of planning, Housing and Planning Act, and the Localism Act from years ago. Have a look through all that in your spare time and you'll see how it paved the way for the property grab of the moment. It says here, they want to tackle low-hanging fruit, in inverted commas, such as encouraging residents to turn the temperature down and control the temperatures in public buildings by heating them smartly. Oh, having smart meters, I think that's what they mean there. Yes, the Internet of Things. Artificial scarcity will be introduced everywhere. They want to look to local eco-friendly suppliers to provide things like locally sourced eco-bricks to help disincentivize the use of concrete and cement bricks. Well, wait a minute. This means councils choosing fake green business partners. Now, how many locally sourced eco-bricks have you got in your local area? Do find out. You might need to. It says new buildings should be built on brownfield rather than greenfield sites. There should also be audits of brownfield sites. Well, there was an audit on brownfield sites. It was called the Brownfield Summit in 2016, and it was held on private property in Docklands, and it was put there to sell off all council housing in London as brownfield. So when they're talking about brownfield to build on, they're talking about bulldozing council property, which they've done everywhere in London. So get ready for that one. But did you know all council housing was classified as brownfield? Did you know that? Well, take a look at the Brownfield Summit of 2016. Let's get on with this. What else have they got to say? The council should focus on the energy emissions from public, institutional and commercial buildings rather than residential properties. Well, they've already told you what they're going to do. They're retrofitting your house. It's going to cost you 25 grand, but don't worry, they'll lend you the money. What could possibly go wrong? Well, they're going to grab as many houses as possible through retrofitting and the cost of heating. So don't give them all the bad news at once. That's what I would say about that last comment. In other words, they're trying to say, well, we're going to go after the big companies. No, they're not. Stop installation of gas central heating in new builds. Yes, you heard it. No more gas central heating. Smart grid, premium price electric only. That's what that means. It says co-working office spaces should be promoted in the city centre. Well, that's communism for all, whether you like it or not. Well, what have you got to hide? Why don't you want to share all your business with the council? Let's see what else. Enhanced biodiversity was central to the overall net zero vision at Oxford, with increased flora and fauna in the city. Now, that means rewilding corridors. That means basically closing off areas as biodiversity meadows and other such stupid kind of terms that they use. It says Assembly members foresaw major changes in transport provision in Oxford, with cycling, walking and public transport prioritised over motor vehicles. What a surprise there. I never would have thought that. They haven't been banging on about that one for long, have they really? Only for the past 25 years. But this is the biggest part of it. Yes, walk, cycle, enjoy. Or walk, cycle, end all joy. They have implanted the most draconian of the choices. Well, yeah, what a coincidence there, eh? Assembly members, it said, were also perturbed by the extent to which the burden of change was in their eyes being placed on individuals. Oh, why do I have to suffer so much? Why is my carbon footprint so big? They wanted to know what large businesses and government were doing to change their ways, and in the latter case, to support individuals and communities to meet net zero. Well, don't worry about that. The government are going to fully support you getting to net zero because they're being told to. Related to this, there were many questions about how changes, new heating systems, retrofitted homes and solar panels will be paid for. Yeah, I bet there was, and I bet there was no answers. Well, there was actually. They're going to actually issue you loans through your local council. We'll get onto that in a bit. There was, therefore, a sense that the council needs to communicate a shared vision and strategy to reach net zero that shows the roles played by local and national government, businesses and individuals. Oh, it will, don't worry about that, with the usual input from the public. None. Oxford, you have been sold a pup, you have been made to look complete fools, but there is still time. You could look at real data and make an informed decision rather than being informed into making one. Yes. Yes, to reach an informed decision, you have to have information, not programming. I think that's the main key point here. It says assembly members wanted more information about how to recycle correctly. Well, don't you put all your cardboard and plastic separate and your food into a brown bin? Well, I don't, but that's what people do, isn't it? So why would you want more information? I mean, they tell you on little cards where you can put your rubbish. They're instructing you what to do. They're micromanaging your life as it is. They're even putting microchips in your bin. I mean, what more information do you need on how to recycle? You get told where to put it all. So it says public information and education resources about retrofitting options and costs is needed, but they did give it actually. It said there should be reliable standards via legislation for retrofitting. In other words, it's going to become law. There's going to be no way out of it that can be effectively introduced and maintained. Draconian legislation on the way. Major house grabbing already in operation. No, they didn't say that, I did. There should be training and inspection of tradesmen for retrofitting work to assess the quality of workmanship. So, what this means in effect is the local council's preferred partners will operate this legislated mafia. You can't do it yourself. You can't have your own tradesmen. Leave it to the state. It's them that will own your house anyway. So that's the way it's going to go. It says landlords of private rental properties should be required to retrofit properties. Again, putting up rents and pressure in the private renting sector in favour of the part ownership shared smart city gulags going up on your doorstep. Well, you did know that living in a house is selfish, didn't you? Get into the communal smart surveillance hive. It's where the hipsters go. Haven't you noticed? All the hipsters are getting into the gulags. Yeah, they are going to take all older people's property. They're already doing it. So why not everyone's? Are you not diverse into vibrant communities or something? What's the matter with you? It says here, a community infrastructure levy could be introduced to pay to retrofit older historic houses. A community infrastructure levy. So in order to get rid of those suburban homes that Maurice Strong said were not sustainable in 1992 in Rio, we're going to have some legislation to help them take your property. Now, you did know that's what it's all about, didn't you? Well, people may find out as they go along, especially in Oxford. You will have to be relocated into the city gulag. That's what it's all about. They did this in communist countries, but the present plan is much bigger than communism. It's global. Communism got a bit of a bad name, though, didn't it, after killing 100 million or so? But it's still popular with middle-class Marxists. Have you noticed this? Though they sort of are going to get a bit up in arms, I suppose, when their houses are taken from them. But, well, maybe they'll just say in The Guardian, there'll be headlines like, why I gave up my house for the planet. There will be. Why I gave up my house for the planet. Definitely. You'll be seeing that in The Guardian over the next few years. Well, actually, you did it for the common good. Well, the common good of the World Bank, but whatever, Assembly members, it says, wanted clearer costs for retrofitting that were more specific to their property so they could make informed decisions. Informed decisions? Why start now? You've made so many uninformed decisions already. Why bother now? Your decisions were informed by your facilitator through group consensus, as George Soros, an open society, and their globalist, anti-globalist lobbying groups say. Like Extinction Rebellion. Remember, we've got them to thank for a lot of this stuff. This is what democracy looks like. One choice, no choice. Let's carry on with this. Loans for retrofitting could be paid back through reduced energy bills, which would help to reduce concerns about how to pay back large loans. So, the looting can happen through the increased energy costs. Heat your house, lose your home. It makes sense, basically. Another suggestion to help homeowners pay for retrofitting their own homes includes grants and loans from the council, liens imposing debt. What does debt do? It means default. It means property grab. Now, just a little distraction issue here about what this is all about. In Waltham Forest, the town hall is going to be turned into flats, and the magistrates' court is already a bar. So you think you're going to have any recourse when they steal your house? No. Take a look at what's going on locally. I've covered this for years. and houses are routinely stolen for small debts through the county court. Many people who listen to this show will probably know that. Councils are the worst for issuing fake paperwork. Well, you know that council tax summonses are printed by the council and not the court. The council just hire a room in the court. The liability orders are printed before the court case. So what could go wrong if the council take you to court for not paying back the loan that you've taken out with them to retrofit your house? You're going to end up with the house being sold and being bankrupted. Remember, councils can already bankrupt you for £750 upwards. They serve you with a statutory demand. They did it with me. They serve you with a statutory demand. You've got 28 days then until you're made bankrupt. And bankruptcy is now administrative. So basically, you've got smart insolvency firms who will be working with organisations like your local council. So the insolvency service of the government pass you over to a private insolvency service. And this will be where the property grabbing really starts to take off. Yeah, it's once you know the way this stuff works, it becomes quite easy to work it out. But take a look at some of our previous shows. Actually, there's one called Council Tax Pantomime Court Procedure. And there's a video called Councils, Courts and Conmen on YouTube. And we filmed inside a so-called court, and we proved that the liability orders are issued before the hearing. So what could possibly go wrong here? We know that there are people within the county court who work with bailiff companies who actually issue writs which are not even lawful, which would be turned down in the High Court. The thing is here, it's all going to be done administratively. Your property will be stolen on the back of a small debt you owe to the council. It's all for the common good, and it'll be put into the smart city gulag. This is pretty draconian stuff, but this is where the poor laws of the 15th century, 16th century have taken us. This is the end result of all that, when banks and corporations run your life. They keep hammering it home. Yeah, some additional comments it says here, and questions under the housing and buildings theme included introduce more co-housing and house sharing. Yes, they keep hammering it home, don't they? The old communist model, the state owns it all and you own nothing. And do what they want when they want it, basically, all surveilled in real time. And don't think you're smart or your smart meter will ever let you off when your bill is overdue. It won't. It'll cut you off straight away. The future is restriction and power cuts for all. That's what's coming. The national grid is already at peak capacity. And once you are on that smart grid system, that smart system, you will be just cut off as soon as you have reneged on your last bill. And who you're going to go to? The council. And you already owe them money. Yes, so basically, this is all included in this report. I would recommend people have a look at it, actually, if you get some time, because there is a lot of repetition in there, but this is what you are going to have to come to terms with, because every single council in the country is declaring a climate emergency, and you're going to have your citizens' assembly on climate change, which is going to take away your rights, your property and your future. So nothing to worry about there. But basically, it says here, assembly members were very positive about creating more biodiversity and green space around Oxford. Creating more green space and planting more trees was considered an easy win and visible that's to the whole community. That's the feel-good stuff, isn't it? There were questions about whether offsetting, this is carbon offsetting, would effectively address carbon neutrality, and if it allowed those who can afford it to continue polluting. Basically, so they say, no, the carbon tax is a good idea, but if we've still got any money left, that means we're too rich. You've got to take it all off us. You've got to bring us all down to poverty. So citizens' assemblies, the way to publicly humiliate and flagellate yourself. That's what they're all about. Basically, have a look through it. There's nonsense after nonsense and imposition of very draconian stuff. Now, I'm going to be doing a lot more shows and putting them out on things like Patreon. I'm going to be putting up special stuff on Patreon. I've got some really interesting things in the archive, and I'm working on a documentary called The Heretics of Smithfield. Anyone who signs up at Patreon and keeps up with what's going on there will receive a copy of the film and an invitation to the screenings. I'm going to be doing more on this in the weeks to come. It's a fascinating project, and it's one which a lot of listeners are already involved with. So this is probably the future. Let's try and keep money within our own community. That would be a good idea, wouldn't it? Yeah, that would be a great idea. I always help people out who I can. So that's the idea of all this, I suppose. And now I'm going to get on to helping somebody else out. And I want you to have a listen to this. It's about talks that are coming up very, very soon. And it's a series of talks called Questioning History. And the event is being put on by Gloria Moss. And it's on the 14th and 15th of December in Hoddesdon, Hertfordshire. And I spoke to Gloria about it, and I'm going to play back what she said. Well, now I'm going to talk to Gloria Moss about a very interesting and quite important event on the weekend of the 14th and 15th of December. So welcome, Gloria.
Hi, Mark.
Hi. So tell us about your event.
Well, the event takes place, as you say, in the middle of December, so it's a bit like a pre-Christmas get-together, and it brings together some remarkable speakers, all looking at fascinating periods of history with a critical eye. And I can't think of any other event that brings so many speakers together to look at past events spanning a long period, a really long period, several hundred years of history. And I think these speakers will make the event really completely unique. Unique not just because of the setting, it's set in beautiful countryside, not too far from central London, but because the conference will attract like-minded people from the UK and overseas.
Yeah, that's very important. And could you tell us a bit about the speakers?
Well, yes. We have, as I say, a very large number of fantastic speakers. Mark Devlin, many people will know his work. He'll be talking about the Beatles and the occult, and that's on the Saturday. On the Sunday, he'll be talking about electronic music and its role in mind control. And that's very contemporary, what he's talking about. If we go slightly back in time, we've got Jerry Doherty, former headmaster, talking about the causes of the First World War, and the rather ghastly fact that he's uncovered through his research, that this ghastly war was planned by a small cabal from London. And then, rather different from that, we have David Noakes talking about the shocking history of the EU, which he suggests actually has its origin with the Nazis. And he actually goes so far as to suggest that it was the University of Berlin that wrote many of current EU policies, for example, the Common Agriculture Policy. And then going back in time, I'm going to be talking about the Great Fire of London, whether this really was the accident that we're all taught at school, started in Pudding Lane, or whether it could have been, the whole thing could have been planned by the powers that be. And then going back still further in time, I'll talk about the site where they found the Dead Sea Scrolls, the site of Qumran, and the real purpose of that site.
That's really
lots of new information, but all very much rooted in hard evidence. I think you have thoughts on that, don't you, Mark? The importance of really being able to gather hard evidence and give a solid critical eye to it.
Absolutely, and you have to look at what the intended outcome is with a lot of these events to actually get anywhere near what they're really about. The controlling of the official narrative is absolute through history, and that's why it's really important to get a grasp on this sort of stuff. Now, you're also going to be talking about how the narrative is controlled and how history is taught in schools and universities. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, well, Alice Smith will be talking about that. Alice studied history at school and university level, And she'll be saying that even at university level, most of the study of history is done through secondary sources, not primary sources. So people are reading historians' accounts of events and not going right back to the sources to find out whether those historians' accounts are actually correct or not.
That is a really good point, and it ties into pretty much everything that we put out. In other words, you have to actually look at real sources of information, and one of the biggest problems today is that people don't look at the real sources of information, and propaganda is absolute. Propaganda is everywhere, so it's great to actually get down to historical narratives that are actually making sense. So can you tell us a bit about the times and the dates again, and where we can get tickets?
Yes, of course. As I say, it's running for 2 days. That's Saturday and Sunday, 14th and 15th of December. That's 3 weeks from now, actually. And it takes place at a lovely venue called Highley, which is in Hoddesdon. You can get a train from Liverpool Street Station to Broxbourne and then just hop in a taxi. It'll take you there in a few minutes. And it runs all day Saturday. All refreshments, lunch and dinners are included in the price, and people can stay over if they want on the Saturday night, which I think is very nice because it gives people a chance to socialise with other people. That's why we're doing this over a weekend, because so often with events people run away at the end and never really get a chance to chat with other people. Here, people can relax in the evening over dinner, over a meal, and then the conversations can continue after dinner as well. In fact, people want to give short presentations on subjects that they're really interested in themselves, then we'd be delighted to offer them a platform. So one of the people in the audience, for example, is going to talk about how his reading of books on the Second World War transformed his worldview, which I think will be a fascinating talk.
That was Gloria Moss there. I spoke to Gloria last night, and she wants to organise more of these events, which I think are a pretty good idea. I do like going back into history, and at the present time, I think it's a good idea to go back into history and actually find out where a lot of this assumption about us came from, and also the narrative of historical events. I've always found that fascinating because there's not one event that I've looked into that has actually tallied up with the official story, not one. So I think that's quite a good place to leave it for tonight, and I hope that was informative. I'm going to be putting out a lot more varied content over the next few weeks. Please have a look on Patreon, and I'm going to be announcing more about these projects over the new shows that are coming up. I'm going to be doing some more videos as well. So thanks for listening, everybody. And just to give you the email for Gloria's event, it's awakeandawareholidays@gmail.com. That's all one. It's all lowercase. awakeandawareholidays@gmail.com. The telephone number is 0777 1535 087. And full details of the programme and speakers can be found on the website, and it's awakeandawareholid.wixsite.com. Bit clumsy that, awakeandawareholid, not holiday, .wixsite.com. But if you email Gloria about the event, she will send you all the details, and it's actually pretty reasonable for what you get in there. It sounds like something which would be good to continue with in the future. So that's it from Windows on the World for this show, and do expect more content during the week, and keep looking at the site and looking at the archive. And when we find out more about the depths that councils and the real government, the global government, are plumbing in their manipulation of the public, you'll be the first to know. Thanks a lot, everybody, and good night. Join me, Mark Windows, for Windows on the World live every Sunday 9 to 11 p.m. GMT. Check out our archive and programme stream at windowsontheworld.net.